Ohio State is not a national championship contender this year. It's a bold claim, I know, but before you grab your torches and pitchforks, let me back up to the beginning of the season and show you why I think this team can't win it all. Ohio State is ranked number 1, and everyone is talking about their dominance, but the hype is getting ahead of reality. The Buckeyes won it all last season and opened this year by beating the preseason number 1 team, a result that had fans convinced they were picking up exactly where they left off. On the surface, it looks like Ohio State is unstoppable, but early cracks are starting to show. Last season, Ohio State barely slipped into the playoffs after a late season stumble against Michigan. Yet once they got in, they looked like a different team. Their only real test came against Texas, and even then they survived in a close game. Fast forward to this year and the Buckeyes started strong. A statement win over Texas, led by college football's golden boy Arch Manning, shot them straight to the top of the rankings. But while the score suggests dominance, the game also exposed areas of concern. Offensive struggles, inconsistent quarterback play, and a Texas team that may have been somewhat, if not heavily overrated heading into the season. Going into the Texas-Ohio State game, most people expected fireworks on offense. Ohio State was starting a young quarterback in Julian Sayin, so fans weren't necessarily expecting elite quarterback play, but the Buckeyes still had plenty of weapons. C.J. Donaldson at running back, and wideouts like Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith. Add in a solid offensive line, and the offense looked more than capable. On the other side, Texas brought Arch Manning, who many assumed would be at least good, if not great, right away. He had a proven running back in Quintravion Wisner, a reliable offensive line, and athletic receivers across the board. Both defenses were supposed to be strong, but with that much talent on offense, the matchup seemed destined to be high scoring. Instead, it turned into a slugfest. Both teams struggled to move the ball, and while the defenses deserve credit, the offenses looked shaky. Ohio State barely escaped at home, and Arch Manning looked especially rough. On the opening drive, he skipped a throw at the feet of a wide open receiver, a play that summed up his night. The rest of Texas roster held up fine, but Arch's inexperience was glaring. Facing him early in the season in a hostile environment might have been the perfect setup for Ohio State. Sayin is inexperienced too, but playing at home gave him an edge. Even so, it's hard to call either of these squads a true top 3 team until the quarterback play catches up. On a neutral field, I'd have a hard time picking either of them to win over a team like Miami with a proven, experienced quarterback, and the concerns didn't stop there. The 14-7 final wasn't just a one-off defensive battle. It foreshadowed deeper problems in the weeks since. Texas offense has continued to sputter, even against outmatched opponents like San Jose State and UTEP. Arch's latest outing, 11 for 25, just 114 yards, 1 touchdown, and an interception against UTEP, makes his struggles against Ohio State look a lot less like a defensive masterpiece and more like a sign that he just isn't ready yet. The real question that comes to mind is this: if Texas is overrated, just how overrated are they? There's a big difference between being a little overvalued and being completely misjudged. Take Georgia last season as an example. They were still a legitimate threat to win the national title, but it was clear pretty early on that it wasn't quite the same dominant Georgia team we'd gotten used to. They were good, even very good, but not at the overwhelming dynasty level standard everyone expected. Now on the opposite end of the spectrum, you had Florida State. They entered last year ranked inside the top 10 and drew praise from nearly everyone. Even Nick Saban was talking about how talented they looked and how they were a real contender. Then the season actually played out. 10 losses later, that opening win that Georgia Tech claimed over them didn't look like a statement at all. Instead, it became a reminder of how quickly hype can collapse when a team simply isn't what people thought. A good parallel is last year's Michigan team. When Texas went into Ann Arbor and beat them 31-12, it looked like a program-defining victory. Michigan was still very talented, and they even managed some impressive wins later in the year, but their one glaring weakness, the inability to pass the ball, ended up capping their ceiling. They could win games on defense and toughness, but they couldn't keep up against teams with more complete offenses. That's where the concern comes in for Ohio State's win over Texas. Texas. I'm not saying Texas is destined to be Michigan from last year, and they're certainly not heading for a Florida State-style collapse into a 10-loss disaster. But if Texas falls somewhere in between Michigan and Georgia last year, good but limited, maybe a step below true contender level, then Ohio State's statement win, while still big for the program, might not be quite what it initially looked like. To make the Texas game even more concerning, the Longhorns actually outgained Ohio State and only fell short because of an interception and 4 failed fourth down conversions, including one at the 1-yard line and another at the 9. Credit to Ohio State's defense for coming up with the stops, but it's hard to ignore the numbers. Texas ran for 166 yards compared to Ohio State's 77, threw for 170 yards compared to 126, and finished with 336 total yards to Ohio State's 203. That doesn't mean the Buckeyes didn't earn the win, but it's not the kind of performance you want to see at home from the nation's #1 team. Julian Sayin has looked good outside of some early interceptions against Grambling State and Ohio State is still a legitimate contender to get to the playoff, but their dominance, the dominance that earned them the #1 ranking, might have had more to do with Texas being overvalued than Ohio State being unstoppable. Most people will give Ohio State the benefit of the doubt over Penn State, since Penn State has repeatedly struggled to beat the elite teams, but this year feels different. Penn State returns most of their playmakers, and more importantly, they have Drew Aller, already one of the best quarterbacks in college football last season. If he improves even slightly, last year's great Penn State team could become elite. Even with the game being in Columbus, I'd trust Aller's leadership over Sayin's inexperience. Last year, Will Howard was questioned at times, but when it mattered, especially in the playoffs, he delivered. Sayin might get there, but counting on a young quarterback to make that leap is risky. Since 2000, only a handful of quarterbacks younger than juniors have won national championships. Trevor Lawrence in 2018, who is considered generational as a true freshman, along with Cam Newton, Jalen Hurts, and Rex Grossman. Tua did win a championship as a true freshman, coming off the bench for that legendary second-half comeback, but to me it only halfway counts. As impressive as that performance was, he spent the entire season as the backup and didn't take over until that very moment. Julian Sayin may one day join that list, but history says it's unlikely. And if we're being honest, the #1 ranking should go to the team most likely to win it all. Right now, I'd put at least 4 or 5 programs ahead of Ohio State in that conversation. Miami, Georgia, and Penn State are at the top of my list, while teams like Texas A&M, Florida State, and LSU feel like potential contenders at this early point in the season. Teams like Oregon might belong there too, but it's too early to say until they prove themselves against tougher opponents. If you're enjoying the breakdown, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit like and subscribe. This is a new channel and every bit of support makes a huge difference. Other concerns for Ohio State is that they don't have Chip Kelly calling the plays anymore. In 2023, Brian Hartline was the offensive coordinator for Ohio State, but head coach Ryan Day was the one actually calling plays. After falling short from their goals, they made Hartline the co-coordinator and had Kelly share the role and call plays. Obviously, that was a successful move considering they won it all and their offense was explosive, particularly in the playoffs. The team went from 46th in points, scoring 30.5 a game in 2023 to 13th and 35.7 a game in 2024. The very ugly game against Michigan last year is the only game in which they scored the same or fewer points than they did on week 1 against Texas. While I've spent a lot of time highlighting Ohio State's potential problems, the Buckeyes still have some serious strengths that can't be ignored. Their wide receiver room is arguably one of the best in the country, loaded with talent and athleticism that can create big plays in any game, and their offensive line has only given up 1 sack 3 games in. On the defensive side, they're anchored by Caleb Downs, one of the best defenders in college football, and the unit as a whole has been extremely impressive so far. For every concern about Texas offense or missed opportunity, Ohio State still held them to just 7 points. No small feat against a team full of 5-star talent. Through 3 games this season, Ohio State is allowing the second fewest points per game in the country. While Grambling State and Ohio were their other opponents, the inclusion of Texas means they've faced better competition than many other top teams have early in the season. Holding Grambling State scoreless and Ohio to just 9 points puts their average at an astonishing 5.3 points allowed per game. That's elite level defense by any standard, even with questions about quarterback play. Julian Sayin has performed reasonably well so far. Against Texas, he completed 13 of 20 passes for 126 yards and a touchdown. The limited attempts suggest the coaching staff doesn't fully trust him to do more, a common approach for a young QB gaining experience. The real question is whether Sayin can step up in a high-stakes game and throw for 300 yards if the defense is having a bad week. Last season, Will Howard averaged 287.5 passing yards per game in the playoffs, and while the Buckeyes didn't need that output in every matchup, they likely wouldn't have won the championship without at least close numbers. Sayin may need to reach a similar level of performance in big games to maintain Ohio State's title hopes. While I expect Julian Sayin to improve as the season progresses, and Ohio State is undeniably talented, a repeat national championship, in my opinion, is still very unlikely. The win over Texas was impressive, even if the Longhorns may have been slightly or even heavily overrated. Beyond Penn State and maybe one or two other challenging matchups, depending on how you rate Illinois and Michigan, the Buckeyes' schedule doesn't present many true tests. They'll probably make the playoffs because of that, but I don't see them making it far once they get there. To win a championship this early in his career, Sayin would need to reach the level of some of the better college quarterbacks in the last 25 years. That's a tall order for any sophomore, even on a team as stacked as Ohio State, and I don't believe he will be able to do it. Because of my doubts in the quarterback play, the offensive coordinator change, and the win over Texas not being as impressive as it initially looked, I don't believe Ohio State is the #1 team in the country or a true threat to win the national championship.